Yo, call me Sonic on Switch the way I kind of might have missed. Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome back to the Games Cage today, and only today, we are actually going to sit down and talk about Sonic's output on Nintendo Switch. I figured, we're about to get the Switch 2, right? And we've effectively gotten the library of Sonic games on Switch 1. I mean, Sonic Crossroads is coming out. That's going to be on Switch 1, but, it's going to be on Switch 2, and from that point on, we're going to have better versions of these games. So I figured, now that the dust has settled, and, the console generation is done, let's look at what Sonic had on this, what potentially was missing, was it good or bad? We'll get into all that. And obviously, you can tell I'm in a different setup. This is going to be my setup for the month. I'm on a little vacation, but you guys know me, bit of a workaholic, so have a whole setup here to do videos and reactions and whatnot when we have to. So yeah, of course, make sure to subscribe to your boy, support the content, consider becoming a member, and all that jazz. So, Sonic on Nintendo Switch. It's funny because this kind of feels like it was a match made in heaven, right? For the longest time, Nintendo and Sega, this, past burden of Sonic with Nintendo has been long gone, and if anything, they've associated with each other more and more. They've made exclusive versions of Sonic games like Gen's 3DS, at that point they had the Boom partnership. Going from the Wii U to Switch was so interesting because, they were so tight. You know what I mean? Think about it. The entire Sonic Boom initiative was effectively a Wii U exclusive, you know what I mean, or Nintendo exclusive, even from the 3DS games, and Sonic Boom being exclusive, Sonic Lost World at the time, the Olympics, those games obviously were not a great era at all, but it did feel like they were growing a relationship between Sega and Nintendo. So that's why going into the Switch, I was thinking, I was like, okay, shit, maybe this is gonna be we're gonna get, everything done here, but we did not exactly get that. So I'm gonna go over the games that we actually got on the console. I'm not gonna get into all the technicals of these games, but average, because I've sort of played all of them at least once. But yeah, let's start. So there's a lot of games, shockingly, that came to Switch, but the first one that comes to mind was Sega Ages. There was this program Sega was running early on called Sega Ages, where this was before they had the Genesis Classic on Switch, and one of their collections that they had where they were porting their old classic games, with the HD borders and the rewinds and the save states and all that, and they did that for Sonic 1 and 2, and for the longest time that's how I played Sonic 1 and 2, and to be honest with you, the Sega Ages versions of those games are pretty good. They get the sounds done pretty good. The sprites look good. You know what I mean? Like I said, you have the save states. They added the drop dash to the game. There's drop dash was still a special big deal. But yeah, I mean, nothing too crazy. It's Sonic 1 and 2. In fact, I might as well just get it out the way. There's at least people have found out, I think there's 4 different ways to play Sonic 2 on Switch. You could play it through Ages. You could play it through one of the Genesis collections they launched. You could play it on the NSO Sega Genesis app, and I think you could play it in Sonic Origins, and I'm sure there's one more place I'm missing. There's always gonna be a way for you to play Sonic 1 and 2 on the console. But yeah, that was one of the early outputs, but it's upsetting all right away because I remember when they announced Sega Ages, I was like, oh shit, this might be the gateway to Adventure 1 and 2, you know what I mean? This might be a way in there, but alas. And to sort of go back to the beginning of my story, the marketing with Nintendo and Sega felt especially still prominent because when they announced the Switch 1, or had the Switch 1 Direct, they had a third-party sizzle reel trailer, right? And boom, the 2 games featured in there, Sonic Forces and Sonic Mania, right? That's because of the end, 2017, anniversary of Sonic stuff they were doing, and they had Mania and Forces heavily promoted on Nintendo Switch. In fact, Sonic Mania is crazy associated with Switch. If you go on Nintendo's YouTube channel and you go on one of the most popular videos, one of their most viewed videos is the Sonic Mania launch trailer. A lot of people were consuming Mania through Nintendo Switch. So early on, they had the marketing with Mania and Forces, and yeah, those games came out in 2017. But I will say, Sonic Mania coming out day and date on Nintendo Switch in August when it did was effectively the first major Sonic release on the Nintendo Switch. Alright, I think it was actually the first. I don't know if the Sega Ages came out before, it might have, but regardless, Sonic Mania, I think Sonic Mania on Switch is still, in my opinion, probably the best way to play those games. I think Mania bar for bar is probably the best port they've done. Like whether you play it in handheld mode or in TV, it looks gorgeous. The sprite work pops up, the loading is like very quick, you know, the game runs 60 FPS. Like I think Mania to this day, like on Switch, is always going to be my favorite way to play that thing. And obviously, you know, on every console, Mania looks good and plays well, but you know, obviously, we're talking about the Switch here, and I think Mania was like a great start. You know, it felt like, okay, this feels like a match made in heaven. There's something about that Mania icon, you know, like the home screen icon on Switch, that just feels like, I'm like, this feels right here. I never delete the game. I always have it on. Like, it's one of those games that I always, you know, Mania is a game everybody kind of jumps back into, but like Mania on Switch especially is one that I just, sometimes I'll just open. On the OLED, it's gorgeous, like, because I have the Switch OLED, and it looks beautiful there. The sprites pop up, so can't wait to try that on the Switch too, funny enough. But yeah, Sonic Mania, one of the early picks, and I loved it. Then in the fall, we got the release of Sonic Forces on Nintendo Switch. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you, the Forces port of on Switch is kind of like whatever. I think it's like 30 FPS instead of 60, which is a little disappointing considering it's, you know, Forces. I think it could go a little higher sometimes, but it's one of those games where it's pretty securely locked at 30 that you don't notice like FPS dips and stuff that badly. But you know, it's still Sonic Forces. Like, again, I'm not gonna sit here and review these games, but yeah, I mean, it's Sonic Forces on Nintendo Switch. It's not offensive to buy the Switch version. Like, it's like, if you were gonna play Sonic Forces, I'd tell you go play it somewhere else. I wouldn't tell you to go play it in general, but, you know, if you were like, I'm gonna buy the Switch version, I'd be like, okay, like, I feel like you would be fine playing it on Switch, but again, not the most exciting release regardless. Another game from Sonic Team that they released on Nintendo Switch was Team Sonic Racing. I believe this is around like the COVID era. I think this is 2019, 2018, one of those dates. And Team Sonic Racing was, you know, our first Sonic Racer on Nintendo Switch. And I will say, kind of a disappointing port. Like, you know, look, for me, there's 3 genres. I mean, I'd like every genre to be 60 FPS, but like, you know, I think especially racing games and shooters, platformers, and fighting games. Like, I feel like that 60 FPS is like so necessary. I feel like you need that. You know, even the GameCube was getting stuff like Mario Kart Double Dash at 60 FPS. And I feel like for a kart racer or racing game, like that nice frame rate just means a lot to the game, right? So Team Sonic Racing comes on Switch. It's 30 FPS. The port itself, like if you just play the game, like the levels are fine. Like everything, you know, sometimes the loading screens can be whatever, but like it's a fine version to play Team Sonic Racing, and I'm glad they released Team Sonic Racing on Nintendo Switch. But again, it's just one of those things of like, there's better ways to play Team Sonic Racing, but like, I don't know, that 30 FPS is definitely an issue for me for the game, but it's a little lower res. Like I think it goes down to 720. In handheld mode, it's pretty nice, right? But for the most part, again, Team Sonic Racing was another game that they put out on Switch that was pretty solid. Like you could enjoy yourself playing on Switch. It's more like I just wouldn't have that as my preferred way to play the game. That's a recurring theme for Nintendo Switch in general, but I had wished they had optimized Sonic a little bit more on the console. Another game that came out on the Nintendo Switch for Sonic was Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games. And funny enough, this is probably the best looking one of the bunch. Like Mario and Sonic at the Olympics looks beautiful, right? Like the team working on that like did a fantastic job. The mini games are all at 60 FPS. Sonic's model looks amazing. Funny enough, like the Sonic gang looks sick. You know, the Mario gang looks sick. Like this game is awesome. I almost, it's almost unfortunate that like other consoles can't get the Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games because of Mario, but I will say, yeah, like I think for the most part, like Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, probably one of the best outputs in terms of visuals. Obviously, like if you're talking about a game itself, it's kind of okay. It's weird. It was actually the only Olympic game we got on Nintendo Switch. Like this is and potentially the last one, right? There's been a lot of rumors that this is potentially the last Olympic Games we're getting, you know, because basically how it works is that like the IP of Olympic Games is licensed out, and I think like they have some rights issues. I think like Ubisoft has rights to like the Winter Olympics, so that's why we didn't get a winter one. And like Sega made an Olympic game later that like didn't have Mario. It was just a regular Olympic game where you could have like a Sonic costume where he's balling, so that exists out there. But yeah, I will say Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games as a game, it's not bad. Like I've had a lot of fun with it. You know, I actually did a competition with it where I lost, so that was great. But you know, has a decent mini game collection. The thing about Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games is I think they all have this problem where like you play all the mini games and then you're like, cool, I have nothing to do. But I will say this one had like the sprite-based mini games that were like really cool. I really like that little concept they were going for. It has a campaign, which the campaign's kind of whatever, but it's like nice that it's there, you know, that they at least tried to do something a little competent in that regard, right? And so like I think for the most part it was a pretty solid outing. Again, not the most exciting release, but one that I felt like was optimized for the console, and I think, you know, was a solid hurrah. It could have been better, but a solid hurrah. Another game from the Sonic team that pulled up to the console, actually not from Sonic team, from Blind Squirrel Games, was Sonic Colors Ultimate. Sonic Colors Ultimate already, like as a port, a lot of people have problems with. Now, I will say, as someone who's played it a bunch, I'm fine with it, you know, especially on PS5. I know they patched and stuff, but like, I remember when I first played it, it's funny, when I first played Sonic Colors Ultimate, this is one of those things where like the internet can like change your perspective on stuff. When I first played it through, you know, through and through, I was like, this is awesome, like, cool. I mean, it's Sonic Colors, and I'm playing on an HD console, because last time I had played it was, you know, in 2011. Well, no, I had played it like a few times after probably, but like, you know, my experience with that game is a Wii game, and because of that, right, I'm like, all right, well, I played this and had a good time with it on PS5 and stuff. The port of Sonic Colors Ultimate like has a lot of issues, like the lighting engine people complain about, you know, the character model and all that stuff, but I will say the Switch version especially is so disappointing, because Sonic Colors was originally a Nintendo exclusive. It was a Wii game, right? And so when you get to the Switch port and it's like 30 FPS kind of, right? The, you know, the resolution isn't that great. The loading, oh my god, the loading times for Colors on Switch are abysmal. Like, you literally will be sitting there waiting for Tropical Resort to load like this, bro. Like, it's crazy. Like, it's genuinely crazy how long some of those loading times can get for Sonic Colors Ultimate. But it's like, again, I will say with the game, like, if you just want to play Sonic Colors, it's fine. Like, you will have a fun time playing. I mean, I love Sonic Colors, one of my favorites in the series. But I think, like, yeah, you'll have a good time if you just like play it, you know. But it's unfortunate that's a lesser version of the other consoles, you know, when like the game was originally from a Nintendo console. But I'm glad it's at least there. It's one of those things where I'm like, cool, like it feels right to have Sonic Colors on Nintendo Switch. They could have done better, obviously, with the port in general, and I wish it was 60 FPS on Switch, and I hope it gets a graphics boost on Switch too. But yeah, Sonic Colors Ultimate exists. And then we had also the release of Sonic Frontiers on Nintendo Switch, and oh my god, I will say, like, Sonic Frontiers on Switch is interesting because, one, I'm glad it's on the console, but at the same time, I'm shocked it is on this console, because oh my god, like, you play the Switch version of this game, the pop-up is even worse than the other versions. The game gets blurry as shit. Like, it feels like sometimes the game is going down to like 480 FPS, especially if it's raining on Chronos on the Switch version. It's like, it feels like a nightmare. The FPS feels sluggish sometimes, you know, but there's times you play it, and if you play it long enough, this is a fucked up thing to say, to be honest with you, but it's one of those things where when you play the Switch version long enough, you kind of get used to it, but like, it's not a good thing. Like, that's not a compliment to it. But sometimes I'm shocked that it even runs on Switch. Like, it's one of those things of like, I'd rather it be there than not at all, because it's shocking actually that, like, you know, it runs the way it does, it looks the way it does, because it feels like the game keeps the way it exactly looks on the other consoles, but it just bumps down all like the sliders of, you know, like textures, resolution, and everything. But like, it's pretty fun. Like, you can play the cyberspace levels, the loading isn't that bad. Shockingly, you play the Titans, and it's not, I thought the Titans would have killed the console, but shockingly the game like runs decently when you're at the Titans. But yeah, like, I think with Sonic Frontiers, it's funny, I obviously adore Sonic Frontiers. It's one of my favorite games, and when I've tried to play it on Switch, I'm like, oof, this is rough. Like, I can get used to it, you know, but again, it's one of those things, maybe if I hadn't played other console versions of it and I just played the Switch one. I know a lot of people that told me they played the Switch version, like, that was their way they experienced it, and they were fine. But yeah, as someone who played it on like a PS5, or at the time, yeah, was it PS5 or PS5 Pro? No, it was PS5 I played it on, and PC and everything, then you go to the Switch one, you're like, oh my god, I feel like I've been set back. You know, like I said, this is also a game that I hope gets, I mean, I'll do a section at the end talk about games I hope get Switch 2 patches, but this is one of them. And I think it sold like pretty well on Nintendo Switch. Again, like it's one of those things of I wish they had done a better job with the port. In fact, I think them porting this game on Switch kind of screwed over the other versions, because people have like found out that like because of the Switch version, that's why the pop-up is so bad, because they all share like one version of the game, instead of like it being a unique version for Nintendo Switch. Ooh, another release that came out on Nintendo Switch from Sega was Sonic Origins, and just like Sonic Mania, I would tell you Sonic Origins, the best place to play it for me at least is Nintendo Switch, right? Like besides, you know, some of the menus, like when you're scrolling, like being in like 30, I think like in game, I love playing it on Switch. Again, you get the nice 60 FPS. The sprite work looks amazing on your TV and in handheld mode. Obviously, it's Sonic Origins, so you're getting Sonic 1, CD, 2, which it's always weird that I have to say CD before 2 now. You get Sonic 3 and Knuckles, right? Obviously, you have the issue with the OSTs in there, but for the most part, like, I know some people, there's a lot of people in the more, like, you know, granular side that, like, analyze Sonic Origins, and, you know, I know it has technically issues, but I will tell you, like, as you guys know me, I play this series for a living. Someone who plays these games for a living and has played through, you know, Sonic 1 through CD 3, whatever, a million times. These are great ways to play these games, especially for an average person that's not going to tell you like, oh, the sprite here doesn't spawn, you know, at the right moment or whatever, which obviously these things should be fixed, not to excuse it, but for 99% of people playing it, Sonic Origins is like a perfect way to experience the classic games. And I also think, again, like the Switch version was probably the best version overall. You know, I know they added Sonic Origins Plus with Amy later on, so that makes it even better. You get like some of the old Game Gear games, which, you know, I could give or take those games in the collection. But yeah, I think Sonic Origins, just like Mania, feels right at home on the console. Speaking of another game that feels right at home on Nintendo Switch, Sonic Superstars, right? Sonic Superstars was also a game that came out for the Switch, and I will say, and I think this is what I've realized as I do this, I think the Switch is just the best way to play 2D Sonic. You basically get the Nintendo feeling of, you know, the handheld console style, and of, you know, 2D platformers as well, but they all run well. Like Sonic Superstars is, you know, I was worried. I was like, okay, it's these cute 3D models. Is it gonna run at 30? But it doesn't. It runs at 60. It looks beautiful. Loading isn't that bad. It's definitely a little noticeable. But yeah, no, Sonic Superstars on Nintendo Switch runs perfectly well. And obviously, you know, your opinion on Sonic Superstars may vary, but I think it's a great game. And so, yeah, whenever I pop in Sonic Superstars, it usually is on Switch. And they marketed it a lot on Nintendo Switch. Not obviously a crazy amount. They could have done better because, you know, they were kind of busy marketing their Mario game coming out the same week. But yeah, no, I mean, if you ever were to just want Sonic Superstars, I feel like this, I'd tell people just get the Switch version if you have multiple consoles. Because again, like in handheld mode, it runs super well on the OLED. It's gorgeous. It's one of those games where like it's already fun to play Superstars, and so you play it on the Switch, match made in heaven, makes a lot of sense. And then the last major release that they had on Nintendo Switch was Sonic X Shadow Generations, right? So this was, you know, a port, and again, another one where like I'm disappointed but happy. So on one hand, I'm happy that it's on the Switch, right? You finally get Sonic Generations on Nintendo hardware, which had never been the case. And Shadow Generations, actually, shockingly, Shadow Generations on Switch is fire, right? Like, it is 30 FPS, which is a little disappointing because I'd like my platformers all at 60. But I am shocked at the fact that it seemed like they fixed the pop-up issue from Sonic Frontiers. Like, Sonic Shadow Gens on Switch, like, when you're in the open hub, like, it looks great. Like, it feels like they figured out the whole pop-up situation. It's, again, you can tell it's definitely, like, sluggish. Like, that 30 FPS in the open zone can be a little, bleh feeling. Especially with when you have the boost games on Switch and the 30 FPS is there, it can definitely feel especially sluggish because you're already taking something that, like, gets blurry, and you feel like you make it blurrier when you're boosting. But Sonic Gens on the Switch version is 30, which that's a little disappointing too. I'm like, come on, man. Like, Sonic Generations is like a 10-year-old game. You're telling me you couldn't get Sonic Generations to be 60 FPS on Switch? I don't believe you. You know, I do not believe you. Sadly, weirdly enough, we know that Sonic Shadow Gens is getting a Switch 2 edition, which, like, I'm happy about that it's gonna have a version that'll have those games at 60. But I was just surprised. I'm like, you can't get Sonic Generations at 60 on Nintendo. But again, the Switch itself, you know, its power is whatever. But, you know, I'm glad it's on the Switch. It's definitely not the definitive way to play it. Maybe the Switch 2 version will be the definitive way to play it, but they're doing something weird with the Switch 2 edition. which is fucking crazy, where you're not gonna be able to just upgrade if you own it. You have to just straight up buy it because it's like a different SKU basically, which again I think is really dumb. I hope they maybe do a discount if you own Sonic Generations for at least for it, but something like that would be pretty cool. But Sonic Shadow Gens on Switch is a pretty solid game to play on the console. It's nothing too, again, like I said, if you have the other consoles, I would say get it there. I would never tell you go get it on Switch first, but it's a pretty good port. And that's it for the mainline releases. There is some little stuff like, I guess if you're just talking about Sonic on the console, they did like Sonic content in Monster Hunter Rise, which was pretty cool because Rise was Switch exclusive for a while, where they added like City Escape music and rings running around. Sonic was in Monkey Ball. So if you wanted a 3D Sonic at 60 FPS, you could play Sonic and Monkey Ball. And yeah, you had like the Genesis ports and stuff. So that was really it. So I will say, right, so if we look here, right, we had Team Sonic Racing, Sonic Forces, Mania, Mario Sonic at the Olympics, Colors Ultimate, Frontiers, Origins, Superstars, Shadow Gens, Sonic 1, 2. So effectively what they did was they mainly made sure that all the games that were just coming out from 2017 to now all had a version on Switch, which I'm happy about. And I think that's always going to be the case now. There is going to be a different version. But yeah, I will say like it's two things. One, I think Sega in general has a problem with Sonic ports. Like they need to port more of them. But like with Switch, dude, it felt like there's like obvious misses. So first of all, I was on it, not that this is a game I love, but I was honestly shocked that like a game like Sonic Lost World didn't make its way to Switch. It was literally a Wii U console exclusive. It still is. It's on PC, but it's still exclusively on Wii U. So I'm shocked that they didn't just do it, because I'm sure they were like, well, I doubt that would have taken many resources to make a Switch version of Sonic Lost World. Again, the reception, you could argue, so whatever, but like you could have just done, here's a digital release of, dude, they could have been like, yo, Sonic Lost World's available on Nintendo Switch today. And people would be like, oh, cool. But I guess they didn't find like the investment was worth it. But that game like runs and plays pretty well. I could have seen like a nice 60 FPS port of that for the Switch. A huge one that was like a miss was Sonic Adventure, man. How did you not get Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 on Nintendo Switch? Like, are you crazy? Like, that felt like a match made in heaven. Playing those games in handheld at 60 FPS would have been glorious, with the borders or like full widescreen or whatever. And obviously they haven't been porting those games in general, but it feels like with Nintendo, they should have done it, man. They should have worked some kind of deal to get that. Not even like Sonic Heroes, like that's another shocking one. Sonic Advance, okay, already, it's bad enough we don't have an advanced collection, but when GBA Online happened, I was like, oh, this is it, bro. This is the gateway, right? This is how we're going to get Sonic advanced games, and they haven't done it yet. Now, it's not to say that they still won't. They're always going to be updating GBA Online, but I think there's a thing now with companies that they want to re-release their own HD collections. And yeah, I feel like with Sonic, they could do a bit of a better job. Like, look what Mega Man is doing, right? With Mega Man, obviously I want new games, but with Mega Man, you have like Mega Man Collection 1, Mega Man X Collection, X2 Collection, Zero, ZX Collection, Battle Network. Like, it feels like they've respected their entire classic library. With Sonic, it still feels like they're dealing with like, no advance and no rush. It feels really disappointing, not only in general, but again, especially on Nintendo Switch. Like, Advance and Rush are, again, Nintendo exclusive effectively. Obviously they're not necessarily Nintendo published, but like they're exclusive by association, right? Like you get those games are only available on Nintendo consoles, so people heavily associate with you there. I would have loved, some kind of port of Advance or Rush, at least exclusive to Nintendo Switch. That would have been huge. I really think like Nintendo underestimates how big the Sonic audience crossover. Actually, no, they don't underestimate it, because they literally did a whole Wii U partnership with Sonic. Like, Nintendo and Sonic, in a lot of ways today, go hand in hand. And I think especially with Switch 2 going forward, that's going to be even bigger of the case. Because if we're getting stuff like Sonic Shadow Gens at 60, and they, maybe do some patches for their older games to be 60, and Sonic Frontiers 2 or whatever launches 60 FPS, 1080 on Switch, which I think is going to be the case. I feel like Sonic Crossroads I'm probably going to play on Switch. If we find out that the game is, 1440p, 60 FPS, or, you get HDR and handheld mode, I'll easily get Crossroads on Nintendo Switch. If there's not going to be this worry about, like, ports being lesser, because that was the thing about the Switch versions of the 3D games, is I always knew it was going to be a lesser port. And so I didn't really bother with them. I bought them to try them out, to talk about them with you all. But it's like I didn't bother ever wanting to go and play them on Nintendo Switch. It was cool in the sense to have a handheld factor for some of these, right? But I'm hoping now that we're leading into Switch 2 that, you know, we're going to get all those future games, and it'll probably be like a no-brainer to get it on Nintendo Switch, which that'll be a nice feeling, because it sucks to always be like, well, I love platformers, and I feel like platformers are at home with Nintendo, and you guys know that. And so it always sucks to be like, oh, I'm not going to get the Sonic game on Nintendo, but hopefully now we will. Again, so no advanced games. You could argue stuff like No Unleashed is a problem. The Sonic Storybook games I would have loved, but again, those are like shots in the dark of like whether those games would ever come back. But yeah, I feel like the obvious misses are No Adventure, No Heroes, no Lost World, since it just feels easy to do, and no Advance or Rush. I feel like that should have been priority number one, to be like, hey, let's celebrate the handheld era of Sonic with Nintendo's, you know, console handheld machine. But I'm sure they're gonna figure that out eventually, and I'm sure there's a lot more Sonic games you would have wanted on the console and I would have wanted. Let me know in the comment section below which ones you would have liked. But yeah, for the most part, I feel like the biggest misses were sometimes with the frame rate with stuff, but I'm happy that we're at the point where like there's console parity. Big problem I felt like Sonic had in the past was, you know, because of how Sonic games ran and were, that like, you know, Sonic Rivals is locked to the PSP, probably never to be seen. You have the Storybook games that are locked to the Wii. You have Gen's 3DS, which it would have been cool if like the Switch version of Sonic Gens like had Gen's 3DS stages. Like that would have been something really cool. But like, I'm glad that now that we have like console parity across the board, and we're gonna have a more powerful console with Switch, that like hopefully the future of Sonic is bright. But again, like they gotta get those classic 3D Sonic games on there, man. Like no OG representation of 3D Sonic era stuff is disappointing. But hey, we have most of the Boost games besides Unleashed. I feel like we do need Unleashed at some point, which would be really nice, but we'll see if that happens. But for the most part, yeah, that is the Switch output for Sonic. Oh, also, this is really random. I'd want to talk about this, but Sonic and Smash for Nintendo Switch was also disappointing. You know, like he's just spin dashing. Now, I hope that for the next Smash game that he's going to have his Frontiers moveset. I actually have a big video you guys have probably seen called Sonic Frontiers moveset in Smash, which like I predicted, or like I predict how his moveset's going to be and hope it's going to be. But yeah, that's really it. We're going to see what happens. So guys, thank you all for watching. You're the best. Let me know how you all felt about Sonic's output on Nintendo Switch. And of course, I will see you all next time. Peace out.